So hi, everyone. Thank you very much for sticking around and coming to my talk. I'm going to talk about Google API access front to back. So my name is Tamar Rucham. I've started as a software engineer over 13 years ago. I was also an engineering manager. And a little over a year ago, I left the comforts of my paid salary, great timing, to start my own startup. I've been working on it for a little over a year on Parent Scheduler, and being a technical founder, I'm writing the code. And a few months ago, I wanted to implement Google API access from my application to be used by the server. And I got stuck. Like I couldn't figure it out. It wasn't working, and I didn't know how to get it to work. So I did, what we all do. I wrote a question on Stack Overflow. And, my expectation is that whenever you post a question, after like 5 minutes, you have 30 great answers. And I was just, something incredible happened, and there was no answer. No one answered my question, even though I don't think it was such an edge case. So I had to figure it out by myself, which was really annoying, and thought I might come here and share it with you, so maybe it can help someone else not to get stuck like I did. So how things are going to roll today, I'm going to start with like a general, what is Google API access? When specifically, what was the scenario I needed it in? The second part will be an overview of how to set it up. What are the different parts that are needed to gain Google API access on behalf of your customers? And the third part will be the code and how it all went wrong, and of course the solution at the end. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to like bombard you with like hundreds of lines of tangled code. At the end of the day, it was literally just 5 lines of code on the client side and 5 lines of code on the server side, which is part of what made it so frustrating, right? Because like it's not a lot of code, and somehow it just I couldn't get it to work. All right, so let's dive right in. What is Google API access? Well, Google, as some of you obviously know, exposes a lot of its services to API access. You can have programmatic control over maps and search and advertising and social. And you can have it if you have implemented in-app purchases, for example. Hopefully you are validating the receipts. You're doing that with a Google API access using a service account. But sometimes you want to have access on behalf of your users. And that's when all of us have seen the screen. You get the consent form. Some scopes require the consent of the owner, the customers, the owner of that data in order to access those. So we all seen the screen. Hey, Tamar, this specific app wants access to these specific services so it can perform these specific actions. It's all very explicit, yay, nay. So why did I need such an access? So what type of access did I need? Well, my app is called a Parent Scheduler. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's a family organizer. So, right, it's a place to put like pickups and chores and different time-related tasks. And you can assign them to the different family members. And naturally, very early on, users asked, hey, can we sync this into our Google Calendar? Because we want to see it in our own calendar, just our responsibilities, not everyone's. But what's important to understand about this scenario, and the thing that made it tricky, is that while I get the consent from my users on the phone, I need to be able to use it from the server side. Because if I'm setting up that dad is picking up a child at 2 p.m. and then it syncs back to dad's Google Calendar, when I change that to 1, it needs to sync again for dad. It cannot depend on dad coming into the app. So if I implemented it only client side and everything, I would get consent and make the API request from the client, it would mean that every user would have to log in order for their calendar to be updated. But the calendar can be updated via these other family members. So that's like the important part to understand in this specific scenario. We're getting the consent from the user to access and add events and change events in their calendars from the phone, and we're going to use that consent and that access from the server side. So how do we set up Google API access? The first thing we're going to have to do is go into the Google Cloud Platform and create a project there. This is going to be our dashboard. We can see stats and we can have access to a lot of different things. It's also in the Google Cloud Platform where we will find the API that we want to access. Everything in this process is going to be explicit, right? Because you're gonna have access. You're gonna have a lot of power over the data of your users once they give you consent. So you have to explicitly go and say, I am going to use Calendar API. That's the second step, to enable the APIs that you are going to access. And then the third part, because we're asking for consent from our users, we're going to create an OAuth client ID. Now, this was the first point where I was like, I'm not so sure, like, is this a web app, an Android, an iOS? I mean, I need it on the client, I need it on the Android, but I'm using it on the server, which is a web app. And then it's a little small, but I'll tell you that it says that if you're using multiple platforms, you'll need a client for each. So I'm like, okay, I guess I'll go ahead and create a client for each. So I created the Android OAuth client. And as you can see, we got a client ID after entering the forms. Now, before I move on to like what we did with this, I do want to take like a side note and mention that there is another step that will be required here. If you want to use the Google API, at first the Google consent form will show with this scary screen on the left. You need to go through a verification process. And the reason I'm mentioning it is because, you know, just so you can take into account that if you do want to implement such a feature, it's not going to be a 2-day thing. You know, you're going to have to allocate the time. In order to get verified, you're going to have to make a request. You're going to have a link to your privacy policy, and you're going to have to make a video that shows all of the different scopes that you're going to interact with. So remember how I said you're going to explicitly enable specific APIs? API is like, okay, I'm going to do calendars, but then within that, you're going to get consent for specific things that you can do. Like you can get, there's a scope for a read only, or there's a scope that allows you to create events and delete them and edit them. And there's a scope that allows you to create a calendar and modify it and so on. So your video is also going to have to show all of these different things, and only then can you get rid of the scary, you know, this isn't verified screen that you obviously don't want to show to your customers. So if you are planning on implementing API access on behalf of your customers, just make sure to allocate enough time to go through the verification, because it takes a few days. Okay, awesome. So we did all the setup. We have a client ID. We've set up the access. And now we're gonna write the code, right? So here comes the second part where I'm like scratching my head. The docs are on the Google Identity platform, and they are very, very elaborate. Like there's a lot of docs, and they're very, you have a lot of data there. But here again, I had to choose, am I looking for access to Google APIs from a server side or from a mobile app? I mean, I'm accessing from the server side, but I got the consent on the mobile app. I don't know, I'll just start with a mobile app like I did before and see where that takes me. Well, I went on the mobile app documentations, and hey, it says that for mobile app, you may prefer to use Google Sign-in for Android or iOS. And I'm building in React Native. Yes, I'm sorry. This is my little confession. There's even a library for that. Awesome, like this is gonna be so easy. I'm gonna be done in a day, right? So I write the code. First of all, I'm gonna specify the scopes. Like I mentioned, everything has to be explicit when it comes to what I'm gonna access and what I'm gonna do. So I'm gonna configure my scopes. Then I'm gonna call sign-in. That's it. And then what does sign-in give me? An ID token. Okay, well I can see that from a server side, I might be able to get a refresh token with the ID token, but not from the client side. What else do I have on the client side? I have get tokens on the Google sign-in, and get tokens give me an access token. Now we have 3 different tokens that I'm mentioning here. So let's take a minute and kind of like make sure we're all on the same page on what are these different tokens? So the first one I mentioned was an ID token. That's the first one you get from the sign-in. An ID token is a JWT, a Java Web Token. We can have probably a 30-minute talk just about JWTs. I think they're pretty awesome, but you know, what they are is a handshake. They verify the identity. They say, yes, this person is in fact Tamar Rucham, who she claims she is, and she has given you access, and we've authorized it by this provider. Awesome. Access tokens that I've mentioned as well, they give you the actual access to the APIs. Those are the ones that you're going to attach to your requests to view or to edit the API endpoints. And what I said I needed is refresh tokens. Why do I need a refresh token? Because access tokens expire, they're short-lived. And I need a refresh token on my server side so I can get more access token. Refresh tokens don't give me access. What they give me is other access tokens. So they are valid as long as they are not revoked. They're just as good, you know, they're good as long as your customers haven't explicitly gone, and each of you can go into your Google account. If you look at the menu, there's like a security or privacy, I don't remember exactly. And you can go there and you can see all of the different apps you gave consent to and what type of consent, and there you can revoke it. And that's the only way where refresh tokens, as far as I know, get invalidated. Maybe if there's a break-in try, but anyway. So I was trying to take the ID token that I got from my client, passing it onto my server, and trying to get a refresh token with it so I can have access over time. And I was just getting an error. And that was the point where I was like, you know, I don't know, it's not working. Let me just ask on Stack Overflow, because it's not a very like out there scenario, I think. Like I would imagine a lot of apps want to get the access here and use it there. So I posted my question, you know, I'm taking the ID token, I'm passing it, and I'm getting a permissions, an insufficient permissions error. I'm not sure what's happening. And like I said, this is where like crickets came, and I was like, the world doesn't make sense anymore. But I had to move on. So, you know, my next thought is like, you know what? It's probably that React Native library. Let me just go down a level and do the actual, you know, API call, you know, like bare metal type thing. I'm going to make the API call because it's probably hiding these other tokens from me. So again, it has the scopes. Oh, I have the mouse here. Nice. I will specify the scopes. That's not a good idea. My redirect URI that will be significant later, and the client ID that I received on that step when I created the client. But alas, this didn't help. It actually gave me the exact same result. It was just a really nice wrapper for the call and all the responses and the different tokens I could get, which is just an ID token and an access token. So next I was like, I must be missing something. And I saw on the documentations on the installed app side, hey, there is a refresh token here and it's returned from this call. But this call has both a client ID and a client secret. And if you remember, I only got a client ID for my Android OAuth client that I created. So I cannot get a refresh token through this endpoint. I was really like pulling my ears at that point. I was like, it doesn't make any sense. But it was this little thing that kind of hinted to me at something that in hindsight sounds so very obvious. And that is, you cannot get, so I was trying to use my web client to get a refresh token with the ID token that was generated by my Android client. And it doesn't work that way. There's a footnote, but it will come back in the end. If I get the authorization for this client, I can't then use it for a different client. And that was kind of, that secret kind of led me on this path that was like the light bulb. And going all the way back to my setup, I realized that what I need is the same client shared across all of the different places if I wanted to use the same credentials to get the consent. So I went back and creating a web application, Now I get both a client ID and a client secret. I can use my client ID to get an ID token, send it back to the server, then use that to get a refresh token. But wait, there's more. I've mentioned a little earlier that I've specified a redirect URI. Now, it might seem here like this is just a request response, but in reality, I mean, we're taking the user to a whole another place. Now this is another page. Maybe they're getting a call, maybe they're getting a text, maybe they get distracted, maybe they went and read the privacy policy. I heard some people do it. So this is not actually a request response. This is a callback. When you ask for consent and the user goes on to this consent screen, you're going to get a callback to that specified URI. And here comes a little trick that I've added that I like to call, oh yes, I actually had a screen, I forgot I had a thing for that, the redirect URI. So this is not the redirect URI you're looking for. And what I'm actually doing is the URI that I specify is actually sending that response, that callback, straight directly into my server with that ID token where I can use it, store it, and then redirect back into my app with the linking. So here is, I'm just gonna quickly show the code. We're gonna set the scopes like we did before. And then we're going to specify the redirect URI, the server. Then we're going to construct this big, long, scary URL that contains all of this information, including our Google client ID. Now, just a side note on security here. We're going to send one of the things that this means when we're doing that redirect, and even if we didn't, we only need the client ID in order to get the ID token. We don't want to store our Google secret on the client because storing secrets on mobile apps is actually not easy or obvious, and we don't need it. This way, all we need on the client side is our Google client ID, and the redirect leads us back into our server. And then on the server side, we'll use that same client ID, the client secret that we got from the web application OAuth client, and that same redirect URI. Now this is not, from now on, these aren't going to be callbacks. These are going to be regular request response, but you do have to specify that exact same redirect URI. You will get a useful error message if you do not, and I would know. And then once we've set this all up, we can just fetch access token, and lo and behold, we get a refresh token, an access token, and the expiration for that access token. So like these are like the 5 lines of code that you end up needing as long as you share that same web client between all the different places. So I called it like the long way around because first of all, it took me way longer than I felt like it should. It was very frustrating, and at the end, when I look back, it's like, why didn't I just go straight? Like, it makes so much sense now, that you need that same client. But while I was actually preparing this talk, I dug through some of the documentations. Obviously, you make even better research when you're talking about it to not sound like a fool. And I saw in some little corner a mention that says that when you do that initial configuration, if you are doing that client side, that Google sign-in, you can specify a web client ID. Now, the documentations were very short and vague, like they weren't very specific, and it was in some corner, and I haven't tried it myself. But it sounds like you might be able to actually do the initial sign-in and specify a web client ID and then use it on the web server, because like I said, it is a very so it seems like there might be another way, but I haven't tried it. Now, what's the pros and cons between doing it this way or that way? Well, as you saw, what I'm doing on the client side, I'm actually opening a link which opens it in the browser. If you go in the Google sign-in path and all the, whether you do it in Android or React Native or iOS, you have libraries for it. It actually opens it up in a native experience. So it opens a model rather than the web client. I don't think that's a very big difference. And what this method, the way I've done it, what it does give is that whole redirect URI and skipping an extra call, having to come back to the client and then sending it to your server. So yeah, that's my long way around to get Google API access from the mobile phone to be used on your server. And if you have any questions, I think that was it.
Thanks.
Tamar.
That was really nice. It was impressive that you started your own water.
Sorry, I can't hear so well. I couldn't hear that.
I said thank you very much for the presentation, and it was quite impressive that you started your own startup.
Oh, thank you. Yes, it's I have a blog about opening a startup. I don't know if I recommend it. It's it's a roller coaster. But thank you, especially not in Corona times. I wouldn't recommend it in Corona times. Thanks.
So, do we have any questions? Yeah. Looking.
Might be worth giving everybody like a couple minutes to write them down. So yeah, you guys, I guess, chat or whatever.
So maybe you can give us a couple of words about your startup. What you're doing? What is this? Is this an app? You said it's a React Native app. What is it doing?
Yeah, so right, I showed my server side. I didn't say my client side is written in React Native, and my server side is in Ruby on Rails. And it's a family organizer, so it's a place for you to kind of invite the different family members, and then all of the time-related tasks or chores, if it's pickups or remembering to take a red shirt to school, and all of these different family related chores. And then what it does smart reminders. So if you get a reminder, hey, you have pickup in 30 minutes, and you click, okay, I remember, then the other side gets notified, so they don't have to usually between parents, you have this, do you remember that you're picking up, so-and-so at this time? So it just simplifies all of that communication.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Has it been live? Has it been public yet?
Yes, I did launch it in the middle of the first lockdown.
Okay.
It's been out for 6 months now. It's on both Android and iOS.
Cool.
Cool.
Oh, and you're all welcome to connect on LinkedIn as well if you want.
Yeah, sure.
So I have one question. So what you talked about is probably not really specific for Google APIs, but for all kind of OAuth OAuth authorization flows, right? For different providers as well.
Yeah, I would assume so. I mean, I haven't implemented that type of act. Usually, for all the other occasions I've used OAuth clients, there was one OAuth client, and you could use it in multiple different ways. I think what threw me off here is that Google API provides a couple of different types of OAuth clients, and they don't necessarily work together the way I expected it, at least.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. And I know from Google APIs, you sometimes need to restrict the scope or at least the daily rate or the daily limits, so you don't have people abusing your API or your credentials or something. Have you looked into this?
I haven't seen that. I mean, with the access can only so the refresh token or the tokens that you get, they're only for this specific account that gave them. So you can't really like use them for any other, like it's pretty strict in terms of security as one could imagine. I haven't seen any issues with like, I mean, I've done quite a few, like, you know, when there's like a whole month worth, if there's a repeating event and somebody updates the event, all of them needs to be updated on the Google Calendar. I haven't come across any problems in that, in like rate of requests and stuff like that.
Okay, because so it operates on behalf of the user and not like it's not using any resources that you pay for, or like, for example, if you use the Google Maps API or some kind of translation API, then you will be charged. So, but in your application, it's basically using free APIs that are provided by the user actually.
Yeah, I guess some of the APIs would be paid, but I haven't looked at them at all. These are just, so everything you can do on the Google Calendar, on your own calendar, you can just do through programmatic access. So if you wanted, you could write your own like little script with your own Google credentials or your own consent to yourself, and use that to update your calendar without having to go to your calendar and do it. Yeah. So it's not using any paid APIs.
Thanks. So we have one question here. Can you read it? Yeah.
Yeah. Can the client be faked to act as the same client and then somehow making the same requests? So, you know, the security around it is rather strict. In general, JWTs are considered a very solid way of identifying entities. So I don't think it would be very easy to fake the client. Like, I'm not a hacker, I wouldn't even know how to go about it. But all in all, the security around it is very, I mean, I've obviously tested it. I've obviously tried like, okay, let me try and take this refresh token and update this other client. You cannot. I mean, the token also identifies the account you're going to take actions on, and the tokens are generated based on the ID token that validates you. So it's all pretty like securely packed. I'd be surprised if there was an easy breach to kind of fake the clients. I would say that this is one of the reasons. So one of the different ways you can do a phishing attack, right? You can pretend to be my app and then try and get the user's access, pretending to be parent scheduler. And that's where the importance of protecting your client's secret. And that's why you shouldn't put it on your app. So it's really hard to protect secrets on apps. I thought apps would be obfuscated, but turns out they're not. In any case, you only need the client ID on the client side, and that's fine. Like, that can be exposed to anyone. And then your secret, you should keep it very secret on your server side, and you have to validate the ID token with that secret that was used with the same client ID in order to gain access. So that's why, yeah, as long as you separate and make sure your secret isn't available, then no one can also fake your client and pretend to be you and try and get the user's credentials in that way, or Google, their access. I see another question here. Are there test endpoints you could use for testing your app against a fake Google endpoint? I've always used my personal, Google account. Didn't even occur to me. There might be. I don't know. As I said, it's easiest for me. I mean, if you want to test it, you could just create a test. I mean, it's all Gmail, right? Or all Google account. You can create a fake Google account or have a test Google account. I actually probably have a few, and then just create a calendar. I guess it depends on your API endpoints. If you're verifying receipts, then you do have a sandbox, but that's a whole other lecture. But for the open APIs, I mean, I've been using my private Gmail, and you can probably create a test account for this.
So, but you need a server-side implementation. You cannot do it without only on the client, right? You could do it probably, but it will be very insecure, this whole implementation.
It would also be out of sync, like Tamar said also, right? You have the risk to end up like with the apps that are out of sync.
So I haven't looked at like client-side only implementation. I think that when you're using the client-side only Google sign-in, then you don't need a secret, and you can do it all with the client ID and the ID token, and it's secure because it's restricted to the phone. I haven't looked at it that much, but if you're doing a client-only API access, you don't need a refresh token. It's all handled via the ID token. I needed a refresh token just because I needed it on the server side.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other questions?
I just wanted to add one thing about the refresh token that you said before. That of course it's important that you keep the clients keep the secret, but I guess one other thing is that as an extra security step that you somehow have a method to expire tokens, right? Even the refresh tokens, in case, for instance, your database gets compromised and some refresh tokens, if you store them there, get stolen by somebody else, you should be able to somehow invalidate everything.
Yes, you can. That's true. Yes, I said the user has to revoke it, but you can also revoke them for your app from your side with your secret. If, for example, you are under attack, you can revoke them, but you will need to get consent again. So you won't be able to have access until you get a new consent. But yes, you can. You do have a specific call you can make to revoke them. Yeah, that's a good point.
All right. If there are no more questions, then we can end it here. And maybe if you want to stay in the lobby for a few more minutes, if people have more questions.
Sure.
Yeah, you have your own table.
Yeah. I'll be at my table.
Yeah.
So
right.
we'll see you
very
there.
much once again.
Thank you.